She loses contact. Okay. Today, we're going to try to understand what fiscal policy is. Okay, as you already know, the government intervenes in the economy to try to achieve certain macroeconomic goals. The three macroeconomic goals we have discussed for the last 4 weeks is trying to achieve full employment, price stability, and economic growth. Okay, prior to the 1930s, we used to believe that there was no need for the government to intervene. The economy was going to self-correct itself. We used to believe in classical economics. In the 1930s, we begin to realize that things were not working the way we thought they were going to be working. And we waited for the economy to balance itself back into equilibrium, and that was not happening. So at that point, a new way of thinking began to emerge, and what we know now as Keynesian economics. In Keynesian economics, is just simply a way of thinking in which we say that in some cases, the economy will never correct itself. So we need some type of stimulus, some type of stimulation to the economy to change the behavior of people. And the way we do that is by government intervention. So since the 1930s, now most nations of the world have now, I guess, lovers of Keynesian economics. By the way, guys, this way of thinking of Keynesian economics by government intervention is not the only school of thought of economics. In other words, there's other economists believe that there's better ways to control the economy or achieve employment. For example, the best school of economics in the world, anybody know what school is that?
London School of Economics.
Which one? The London School of Economics? Okay, the London School of Economics is at the top. It's like the second best school of economics in the whole world. But the best school to study economics is the University of Chicago. The University of Chicago, the Department of Economics, in their professors, they have 4 individuals that have actually won the Nobel Prize in Economics. Now think about this, the Nobel Prize in Economics at the University of Chicago. In the University of Chicago School of Department of Economics, they believe that government intervention by fiscal policy and monetary policy is actually not very good because it creates fluctuations. It can move the economy very rapidly, one movement, or it can move the economy the other way very fast. So what they believe is that instead of government intervention by fiscal policy and monetary policy, what the government is supposed to do is just simply maintain a constant flow of money into the people's hands. In other words, find ways of just giving people money, a little bit of money, a little bit of money, a little bit of money. And when people begin to get a little bit of money, they will always find ways of spending this money. So the economy will always be moving towards productivity, okay? So, but again, that's another class that we're going to be discussing. Today, we're going to go back and continue trying to understand Keynesian economics and how Keynesian economics works, and that's by government intervention. So the United States intervenes in the economy 2 ways. One is by monetary policy. We're going to learn that in chapter 12. In monetary policy, the government changes the amount of money in the economy. Right? And the way we change the amount of money in the economy is simply by making money more accessible, lowering interest rates, for example. Right? So if people have more money, they're going to spend more. And if we spend more, then the economy will begin to move because companies will hire people, people have jobs, people have income, people consume, and we begin to create a movement to the right. Now, the second way in which the government intervenes in the economy is by fiscal policy. And that's what we're going to learn today. Fiscal policy is changes in the level of taxes and changes in the level of transfer payments. Right? By changing taxes, it actually impacts our disposable income. Right? If we lower taxes, people have more money, they have more money, they're going to spend more. Right? And if we increase taxes, well, it's the opposite. We have less money to spend, consumption will decrease, the aggregate demand will shift to the left. Now, the second tool of fiscal policy is transfer payments, and transfer payments is just like government benefits, money that the government gives. Think about, for example, that people receive food stamps and unemployment benefits and disability checks and retirement checks. And what we just did last week, a couple of weeks ago, the rescue package that we created, which, by the way, we are still debating what are we going to do. Are we going to go with the second package? And the Senate is actually debating that as we speak. We'll get some news probably by next week if this is going to happen or it's not going to happen. But they're still debating this. Should we put more money in the hands of individuals? The reason, the reason the Republicans are not too thrilled about authorizing this second round of aid is because they believe that we need to wait to see the actual impact of the first round. In other words, we cannot feel the impact. We don't know exactly what's going to happen. So they're waiting for the second, for that data to determine exactly we need to do the second. I will not doubt that it's going, well, I will not say I will not doubt. I will not be surprised if it did not happen. And the reason is because you haven't seen the numbers. Just this today, they announced the unemployment numbers, and the unemployment benefits this week increased by 2.1 million additional people claim unemployment. So as of today, excuse me, as of today, the unemployment numbers have increased to 41 million people. Now think about this, guys. 41 million people in the United States have lost their jobs, right? And these are the people that have actually claimed unemployment, which probably means that there's other people that have lost their jobs, but because they work on the, I don't know, on the informal sector, or we have illegal aliens that they don't have Social Security, then they cannot claim unemployment benefits. You know, we have about 11 million undocumented workers, and I will not be surprised if half of them have lost their jobs. So we have another 6 million undocumented workers that they, at this point, they have no income, and they have no government aid. So as you know, it's a very serious situation. So we will see what's going to happen in the next couple of weeks. So let's go ahead and begin the chapter, and let's discuss fiscal policy and how it actually works. Okay. Okay. Again, on this chapter, we're going to try to understand fiscal policy. We're going to try to understand why, when the aggregate demand changes, we have gaps in the economy, and what is the tools that the government will use to try to close these gaps. Don't begin to write nothing, because we're going to go over this. Okay, so Keynesian economics believes that macro instability requires government intervention, right? That's Keynesian. That's the fundamental basis of Keynesian. We need to intervene in the economy. For example, they say, if the aggregate demand falls, like what happened in the 1930s, what is happening now, unemployment increases, right? And unemployment increases, now people have no money, and if people have no money, they are not going to consume, which simply means it's going to force companies to cut production and even lay off more people. And now we have more people laid off, and now less income, and then less consumption in other industries, and those industries are going to cut production, and they're going to be more laid off. So we let this cycle to continue, we're going to go to a point in which there automatically will be no economic activity. Think about, for example, what is happening today in the United States. Boeing Corporation, right, just laid off 16,000 people yesterday. 16,000 people. In addition to that, they announced that they were going to reduce the labor force by 10% worldwide. Okay, so we have 16,000 people, most of them in the area of Seattle, Washington, where Boeing Corporation do most of the manufacturing. And the reason is because last year, remember that when they introduced that incredibly new plane, the 737 something Dream Jet, and it crashes. So the planes were grounded, right? The company was actually hoping that that plane was going to create a lot of demand, and there were going to be humongous amount of planes purchased by them. I think they had orders for 100 planes, and all 100 airlines decide to say, we don't want to buy this plane because it's unsafe. Right? And then they were hit with this coronavirus, in which 95% of people stopped flying. So they have not been able to sell a single plane, guys. Think about this. Boeing Corporation has not been able to sell a single plane on the last 2 years. So now think about this. You're a store. Imagine you're a store and you sell, I don't know, lollipops. And for 2 years, you don't have a single customer coming into your doors. No, what do you do? By the way, Boeing Corporation is the largest maker of passenger jets worldwide. They have been able to maintain a little bit of revenue because they have maintenance contracts with some airline companies. You know, but some of the airline companies are also now going into bankruptcy. And some of the airline companies do not have the money to be able to pay for the maintenance. Right? So then the situation was, how does the future for this company look like? Well, it looked very, very, very dark. So this company now is laying off workers. These workers have no income. These people are not going to go to the local stores to buy whatever they were buying before. And those stores are going to let go of some of the workers. So it's a continuous cycle. And that's why Keynes said that what we need to do, we need to have some type of government intervention. You know, on the other hand, if the aggregate demand begins to move too much to the right, inflation is going to increase. So Keynesians argue that the market cannot correct these imbalances. It is the responsibility of the government. The government has to intervene in the economy, and they have to do this through fiscal policy. So then fiscal policy is the use of government taxes and spending to alter macroeconomic outcomes. So when the government intervenes in the economy, it intervenes in the economy with the goal of trying to change or to alter the issue of inflation or unemployment, or simply the economy is stagnated and we want the economy to continue growing, okay? So in this chapter, we want to try to understand these tools. We're going to try to understand, for example, how do government spending and taxes can ensure full employment? What actions we need to take? And what is the risk of government intervention? And what is the problem when the government intervenes in the economy? Okay. So, hold on for a second. Let me check on something here. I'm trying to, okay. I want to know if we actually, yeah, we are recording. So I want to be sure that we are recording on this. Okay, so continue with this. So then at this point, the federal government collects about $3 trillion a year in taxes, in revenues, or in tax revenues. That's the federal budget. It's about $3.5 trillion what they collect in taxes. And out of this money the government collects, about half of that come from individual income taxes. In other words, from the taxes the government collects. Well, as you already know, this year we have a problem because 40 million people are not working. And if 40 million people are not working, that means that we are not paying taxes, income taxes. So then the budget for the federal government this year is actually going to be less than $3 trillion, right? So from all this money the government collects, about 50% of that is actually money that is already designated as a transfer payments. In other words, out of the $3 trillion, about $1.5 trillion is money that the government automatically had to send to individuals that they are receiving government checks. We're talking about disabled people, people that they are government pensions. You know, in other words, half of the money is to be given to people as income. The other half is the money that the government can use to do government expenditures, you know, to purchase things, okay, to pay for services, to pay for the postal service, to pay for the Air Force, to pay for the Army, to pay for all the people that work for the government. So then, excuse me, I was outside and I think there's some pollen or something is affecting me, you know. Okay, so again, from the amount of money that we collect, 50% is income transfers, and income transfers is payments to individuals for which they are not producing nothing. It's just simply something the government gives them, like somebody that is disabled, right? That's income transfers. So then the government has a lot of power to intervene in the economy because they have the power to be able to change the level of taxes or being able to change the spending power, the amount of money they're going to spend. So this is going to have an impact on the aggregate demand, right? So if we change the amount of income or if we change the amount of taxes, that will impact aggregate demand. So let me go back into this, and then I'm gonna change my computer. And I'm just simply going to explain just how simple this actually is. Okay, as you already know, all the companies in the economy produce the total amount of products, the aggregate supply. And then we have the aggregate demand, which is the total demand that takes place in the economy. And we already know that the aggregate demand is equal to the C plus the I plus the G plus the X minus the M, okay? If for some reason the aggregate demand shifts, people become a little bit concerned about the future, people simply postpone their consumptions, and companies are not investing, like what is happening today. So let's assume, well, let's go back 10 weeks ago. 10 weeks ago, the economy was at its best that it has ever been in the history of the US government. The government was incredibly growing. We had the lowest unemployment that we had in 50 years, about 3.9% unemployment. So the economy was actually, let's just call it a full employment. Everybody was working, right? Everybody was working. The government came and tried to solve this epidemic by telling companies to shut down, right? So automatically, when companies shut down, individuals begin to lose their income. So consumption automatically begin to decrease, and consumption decrease, and now we move into a lower level. Consumption decrease, and then eventually companies postpone their investments. Remember what I told you, that Boeing Corporation had a contract for 100 planes? And as a result of this, all of these contracts that they have already disappeared. So investments have decreased. So then that even put more pressures on the aggregate demand to continue to go down. So by this point, we already someplace right here, right? So now, instead of producing at $21 trillion like we were used to, that we were producing before, now the economy is producing at a lower number than that. And again, I'm just gonna change the numbers to make it easy to explain. So let's say we were at $1,000 billion of production, and now we are $700 billion of production, right? So not only that, we also now have less productivity, which means that we have higher unemployment. How much unemployment do we have? Well, the unemployment rate, remember, a couple of months ago, it was 3.9. The unemployment rate is now higher than 20%. I mean, this is very serious. We are beginning to move close to what we experienced during the Great Depressions of the 1930s. This is the hardest recession we have experienced almost for 100 years. So now we have 40 million people, 40.7 as of 2 hours ago, actual reported people unemployed, almost 41 million people. So then the question is, what are we going to do with this? What are we going to do with this? So that's why we're trying to come up with a budget. That's why the Senate is trying to figure out what we want to do. And one of them is do a second stimulus package. So if we do a stimulus package, what we're going to do is give individuals more income. And if we give individuals more income, we expect that these individuals are going to spend some of this income according to their marginal propensity to consume, the desire to spend. So let's say we give individuals $1,000 a piece, individuals are going to spend a little bit of that money or a portion of that money, let's say 90%. So then each individual is going to spend 900. So now multiply 157 million households in the United States, and all of them receive $100,000, and all of them are going to spend 900. So then consumption will begin to increase. So then we have an increase in consumption. So the aggregate demand moves to the right. And then when people begin to move, then companies begin to realize that, hey, now I need to produce a little bit more because there's demand. So then investments will begin to increase, and investment begin to increase. Companies begin to expand, and then companies begin to hire people. People begin to get hired, people have income, and people are going to consume more, and the aggregate demand will continue to increase. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to stimulate the aggregate demand to go in the direction that we believe we need to go. So on this chapter, we're trying to understand fiscal policy. So fiscal policy is changes in the level of taxes and changes in the level of transfer payments. Okay? So if we want to get out of this recession that we're experiencing, what do we need to do about transfer payments? Do we need to increase them or decrease transfer payments? And it's very simple. We need to what? To increase transfer payments, give people money. How can we do it? By changing taxes. What do we need to do? Exactly, we need to lower taxes. And if we lower taxes, we increase the disposable income. And once we increase the disposable income, people are going to consume more, and the aggregate demand will begin to move to the right. Okay, so that's the whole chapter, what fiscal policy is. So now let me jump into something else. Well, it's the same thing, but I'm going to go in more details instead of using the PowerPoint slides. So let me tell you how we calculate how much government interventions we're supposed to do. Let's assume that right here, aggregate demand and aggregate supply, I'm sorry, it's the other way around. This is aggregate demand and aggregate supply. So we have the aggregate demand and the aggregate supply, the economy is in equilibrium at this point. For some reason, individuals begin to buy less. Let's say what we experience today and the aggregate demand decrease, and now we are someplace right here. Again, this is prices, this is quantity. So now we went from 14,000 to, let's say, 12,000. Okay, let's say this is the price of, let's say you call it at a price of P1. Okay, so at a price of P1, we were buying $14,000 worth of products. We were producing $14,000 worth of products. The economy was an equilibrium. So let's just call this full employment. Remember, when we're talking about full employment, that does not mean that everybody's working. It just simply means that we have an unemployment rate between what and what? I'm asking. Remember, in the United States, it's normal to have people out of work because of the seasons, people out of work because they have no skills, people out of work because they are in transition, right? So then the natural rate of unemployment in the United States is what? Anybody recall? Come on, guys. What's last week?
4 to 6?
Yes, between 4 to 6.5%. So in other words, when we are at full employment, that means that we have an unemployment rate between 4 to 6.5%. That's full employment. So we need to bring the economy back. We need to move the economy. We need to move the economy the other direction. We need to move the economy to go back to full employment. So my question is, what do we need to do? Through fiscal policy, what do we need to do to be able to achieve that? Come on, guys, you know, we just discussed that 2 minutes ago.
We need to increase transfer payments and decrease taxes.
Okay, one option will be to increase transfer payments, or number 2 will be to decrease transfer payments. Then the question is by how much? Well, to be able to know by how much, we need to know what is the shortfall, by how much is the economy, you know, and the difference between what we want to go and where we are. So now look at this. At a price of P1, because prices have not changed, right? At this point, prices are beginning to go down, but they have not changed. So then as you can see, at the original price, the shortfall, you know, the shortfall of where we are, see, we are right here. We are right here. We are 1,200. And where we want to be is actually, you know, in other words, here's the gap. The gap is right there. The gap is only 2,000. See, the gap from 12 to 14 is 2,000. That's the gap that we have. But to close that gap, we need to spend a little bit more than the gap to be able to achieve that. Because listen to how, put attention to what is happening. If people begin to buy, if we give people money so they can increase consumption, as we give people more money to increase consumption, prices begin to increase. Prices begin to increase. So as prices begin to increase, you can see right here, as demand is increasing, prices begin to increase. As prices begin to increase, people begin to buy a little bit less. So then what we need to do is try to stimulate the economy to be able to go from where we are. Okay, we are right here, right? From 1,200 to 1,400, but the actual gap that exists, or the actual shortfall is, that is the amount. So the shortfall is actually $4,000. So that's what we need to close. The gap of from 1,000 to 14,000, the gap is 4,000. To be able, that as the line begin to move this way, right, be able to achieve this equilibrium. Okay, so you look at the shortfall to be able to close the gap. The gap is only 2,000, but the shortfall is actually 4,000. So then we know that every time individuals spend money, money multiplies, or consumption. We have a multiplier effect. Remember, the multiplier is equals to 1, let me change the, equals to 1 divided by 1 minus the MPC, or 1 divided by the MPS. So if I tell you in this economy, we have an MPC of 0.9, then right away you know that the multiplier is 10. So K is equals to 10. So everything we do is going to multiply 10 times. Everything we do is going to multiply 10 times. So then how do I close the gap? Well, you look at the shortfall, and then you divide that by the multiplier. See, how much is the shortfall? The shortfall is, we want to go from 1,000 to 14,000. So the shortfall is 4,000. And then we divide that by the multiplier of 10, and that will be equals to 400, which simply means that if the government spends $400 in government purchases, right, we are going to be able to move the aggregate demand this way, and we're going to end up in this new equilibrium. Okay?
I have a question.
Yes, go ahead, Melody.
Okay, so I'm a little confused, I think. So I thought you said, and I could be totally wrong, that if the government has to spend more than the amount of the gap.
Okay, no. The government has to spend more money to be able to close that gap.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. You were right. In other words, the gap is only 2,000. But to be able to close that gap, we need to generate a consumption that exceeds more than 2,000. Okay. So look, let me see if I can explain it here. Let me come right here. Hold on for a second. Let me share my screen here. Let me come back. Okay, I'm gonna move rapidly and then I come back. Let me see, what slide is this? This is a slide number, hold on for a second. Let me go share screen. Share, when number 6. Okay, let me go right here. Okay, well, actually we can continue from there. Okay, so the government can alter the aggregate demand by buying more or giving just people more money, right? We raise or lower taxes, or we change the level of income transfers, okay? So then look at this. The economy is in equilibrium at point D, right? That's full employment. The economy is at full employment at this point. Now the aggregate demand decreased, and the aggregate demand decreased now to ADs of 1. ADs of 1. So now we are now at 5.6. So now we have created a recessionary gap of $400 million from 5.6 to 6. That's the recessionary gap, right? In other words, ignore aggregate demand of 2. Just look at AD of 3. So this is what the original situation. Everybody's working. We have full employment. Then the aggregate demand decreased dramatically to ADs of 1. So now we are operating at 5.6 trillion instead of $6 trillion. So we need to close this gap. We have a recession. We need to get rid of that recession, right? So then the question is, how much do we need to spend? And what we know is that whatever we spend is going to create a multiplier effect. So then we say, okay, so how much is the shortfall, but how much we are short? Well, you look at this price, because this is the price today. See, demand decreases the price today. So then at this price, at these prices, we have a shortfall that go from point A to point B. See, because remember, this line does not exist. These lines are no longer in existence, right? They disappear. So you say, to be able to make a new line that will intersect the supply curve at this point, then we have to move the aggregate demand, horizontally together at the same time. So to be able to move the aggregate demand all the way to the right, for that line to intersect the supply at QF, we have to close a shortfall. And look at this shortfall. How much is the shortfall? The shortfall is now from 5.6 to 6.4. So the shortfall is actually now what? $900 million. So we need to create enough demand of $900 million for that line to intersect here at 6. Okay. So now let me see if I can explain it here in a slow motion and see if this makes a little bit of sense. Okay. again, the economy is at $6 trillion. That's where we have the equilibrium, the aggregate demand. The aggregate demand decreased, and now it decreased. So this line no longer exists, right? So now we are now at 5.4, or I think it was 5.6. We are now at 5.6, okay? So then at 5.6, we have a recessionary gap of $400 million of where we want to go. So then what we need to do, we need to move this aggregate demand, and let me create the curve in a different way. We need to create the aggregate, we need to move the aggregate demand, we need to move the aggregate demand up. See, the line moves parallel. So think about this. If we just move it, let's say, again, we need to move it up. So if we need to move it by this amount of money, boom, right? We still have not reached this point. This is my goal. This is where I need to go, right? That's my full employment. I want that my aggregate demand and my aggregate supply to intersect at this point right here. This is my destination, point D. So I move the aggregate demand a little bit more, and we still a little bit short. We move it, and then bingo, we reach that point right here. So, you know, as you can see, at this price, to be able to achieve the destination point, we need to create enough purchases that the consumption will go, that it will intersect this point. So we measure the distance at given prices, at this price, at today's prices, how much consumption we need to generate. And as you can see, let's say this is now 5.4. I'm sorry, 6.4. So now we have a shortfall, let's say, of $900 million. So we need to generate consumption of $900 million. So the aggregate demand will go, and we'll be able to intercept that point. Now, it's a little bit confusing if you really think about it. If you say, but why do I need to increase consumption by $900 million when the actual gap is only, look at this, when the actual gap is only 400? You go right here, the actual gap is only 400. Why do I need to increase consumption by 900 to be able to achieve that objective? And the reason is because when people begin to buy, prices begin to increase, right? Prices begin to increase. Or simply put it the other way around, just because you're beginning to buy, that does not mean that producers are going to produce more. So if the prices stay the same, think about this, if the demand increases and prices stay the same, producers are not going to, provide you that product because they are not making any money. So then all you have to know is this, and we will make it very simple. All you have to know is measure how much is the shortfall. By how much are we short at these prices? So if the shortfall is 900, then it's what can we do to increase consumption by 900? And do you remember the formula that I gave you yesterday? The change in GDP is always equal to the initial change times the multiplier. The change in the GDP is equal to the initial change times the multiplier. So now think about this. How much is the change that we want to generate? The change in GDP that we want to generate is 900. So it's 900 equals to initial, we don't know what it is, times the multiplier. On this case, I believe I told you the multiplier is 10, right? So if the multiplier is 10, so we divide everything by 10, simple algebra, there'll be 90 equals to the initial change. So then the government has to spend $90 or 90 million, and those 90 million will multiply and are able to help us go back to the equilibrium. Okay? So now let me come back here. And again, guys, it's very simple. If you just don't overthink it. Don't overthink the situation. Now, look at this. Let's go back to the situation. At which point is the economy at full employment? And the answer is we are full employment at the point where aggregate demands of 3 intersects aggregate supply, which is, at point D. That we are full employment, right? Now, the economy went into a recession and the economy decreased all the way to AD of 1. So, well, at AD1, we are producing 5.6 trillion. So as you can see, we have now a small recessionary gap. The economy has gone into a small recession. But how much has been the recession? A decline in consumption or production of 400 million. That's what we have at this point, at 400 million. Okay, so now we need to move the demand that it will intersect this point, that it would intersect this point. Okay, so then for the demand to intersect this point, at today's prices, this is the amount of the distance that we have between where we want to go, the objective. This is the demand, this is the shortfall. And that the shortfall right here is actually from 5.6 to 6.9. So the shortfall is 900. So then how much money do we need to spend to get rid of a shortfall of 900? And then the answer is whatever we spend is going to multiply. Okay, so now let's see if you can help me on this. Okay, I'm gonna create a situation and I want you to give me the answer, okay? So get a little bit of sheet of paper and see if you can work this problem. In this economy, we have an MPC of 0.75. We have an MPC of 0.75, okay? The economy is presently at 1,000. And we believe that at this point, we have too much of unemployment. Right, so we need to stimulate the economy. I'm sorry, this is the aggregate supply, this is the aggregate demand. We need to stimulate the economy. So we go to full employment, which is right here. And the full employment is at $3,000. That's what full employment is. So as you can see, at a price of 1, where we are now, we have a shortfall, right, of, let's just call it this. Okay. Let's see you're following me, okay? So we are at ADs of 1, we want to go to ADs of 2, right? At this point, we want to stimulate the economy that will go this way so we can close this gap. That's the gap that we want to create, close. But you already know that a price of 1, this is actually the shortfall. Because that's the amount of activity that we want to generate. So how much is the shortfall?
3,000.
Exactly. So then we need to create a $3,000 million in consumption. So then how much does the government need to spend?
Is it 750?
You are correct, sir. Remember, change in GDP is equals to initial change times the multiplier. On this case, you know that the change we want to generate is 3,000, right? We want to try to figure out how much we need to spend, and we know that the multiplier is 4, right? So 3,000 equals to blank times 4. We divide both sides of the equation by 4, and it will be 750. So then if the government spends $750 million, right, that would create a multiplier effect in the economy, right, of 3,000. And we're going to be able to close that gap. The gap is only 2,000, but to close that gap of 2,000, we need to be able to generate a consumption of 3,000.
Can you remind me how we know that the multiplier is 4?
Yes. The multiplier is equals to 1 divided by 1 minus the MPC. I told you that in this case was 0.75, so K equals to 1 divided by 1 minus 0.75. K equals to 1 divided by 0.25, which is equals to 4. 1 minus 0.75 equals to 4. Okay? So the first thing you have to do is the multiplier. So think about this. If I tell you, in this economy, the multiplier is 6. right? And the government spends $100 million. What impact is that going to have in the economy? It's going to increase the aggregate demand or the consumption by 600. See, change in GDP equal to the initial change, which will be 100 times the multiplier 6, it will be 600. So the GDP will change by what? By 600. Okay. Okay. Any questions? Okay, so now this is a question that is going to require for you to engage in a new experience. And this is actually thinking, okay? I'm being funny, guys. I'm not. Okay, so let's see if you can help me here. This is the aggregate supply. This is the aggregate demand. The MPC is 0.8, right? The economy is now in equilibrium right here, let's say at 1,000. We want to move the economy all the way to right here. We want to close, we want to achieve this number right here. Oh, come on, bro. Did it kick me out? No, I'm still there, right? Okay, let me see if I can do it again. I cannot see myself on the screen. Let me see, this will help me. Okay, I'm gonna leave the meeting for a second and I'm gonna come back, okay? I'm gonna put you on hold. Okay. People are not behaving, you know, the normal because of the fear that we actually experiencing now. So then if I want to close this gap, what I need to do is I have to give individuals a little bit more than 2,800 because I know that 2,800 is only 80% of how much they're going to, or how much they need to get in income. So how much is 2,800 divided by 0.8?
$3,500.
If I give people $3,500, then people are going to spend 80% of that. And 80% of that will be 2,800. There will be 2,800 times the multiplier of 4, and bingo, we close the gap.
I have a question. So in the calculation, when we weren't talking about just giving people money, we were factoring in a marginal propensity to consume, right? Like, are you talking about, like, are we now shifting to if we just give people money directly rather than using government purchases?
Well, yes, because government purchases, they don't care about the MPC. Do you really think about it? So in other words, the initial purchases, boom, I'm going to spend $2,800. So the government just put $2,800 in the economy, and that $2,800 generate income. Then people begin to spend, you know, 80% of that. So you can break the calculation, and it's going to come up with the same number. The only thing that I have to tell you is this: what really matters is the initial purchase, the initial. Because remember this, the change in the the change in the GDP is equal to the initial change times the multiplier. So if the multiplier is 4 and the initial change, let's say, is 2,000, well, the change is going to be, you know, what is it, 8,800. I mean, that's what it is going to be. The initial is this. But if we give people 200, people are not, that's not going to be the initial change, because people are only going to consume according to their MPC. If their MPC, let's say, is 90%, then only when we give people $200 in income, they're only going to spend according to their MPC. Let's say the MPC is 0.9, so they're only going to spend 180. So 180 times 4, you know, is what? 0, to 720. But if the government spends 200, then the actual change is what, 800. So then the impact in the economy is a little bit smaller when we give people money, because people do not spend all the money, they spend less. They spend according to their MPC. But if we go ahead and spend that money directly into the economy, then the impact is what? It's actually larger. So then the question is, what has a greater impact in the economy? And it's what? The direct government purchases. Now, let's see if you are following me. Okay, again, another question that's required for you to think. We have 1,000. We want to stimulate the economy all the way to right here. We want to stimulate to this point right here. Right, and this point right here, doesn't really matter what point it is. Let's just call it X1. We want to do it right here, but at this point we have a shortfall of, let's say, 5,000. So the shortfall that we have is 5,000. So if we move this line, by 5,000, we're going to reach this point right here. We're going to end up there, right? If we move the economy by 5,000, this is how much. If we move it by 5,000, we're going to end up in that equilibrium. Yeah, I was just thinking about colors you like, Cliff. That's why I use that. Okay. You're always laughing now. You're always smiling, Cliff. Are you having a private conversation with somebody else while I'm teaching? Cliff? I'll say, are you having a private conversation
I'm
with
just
somebody
really
else?
tired and bored and on caffeine, so everything's a lot funnier than.
Oh, okay, so everything is funny. Okay, so coming back to this, the gap is 5,000, right? The gap is 5,000. Okay, so if we have an MPC of 0.9, we know that the multiplier is equal to 10. So question number one, by how much does government purchases have to go up to close that gap?
$500.
You're right. 500 times 5. I'm sorry, 500 times 10, that will close the gap and we end up in that equilibrium. Remember, this X1 doesn't really matter what it is. What we want to know is that the line will move, that it will intersect right there, right? And then that will give us this point. See, because remember this, the lines move parallel. They move parallel. They move parallel, right? So as they move parallel, so then we just need to close this gap. And this gap in this case is 5,000. Okay. How about if we want to do it by changing consumption? What do we need to do?
It'd be 555, a little over that.
Okay. Okay.
I'm sorry.
Hold on. No.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. We want consumption to go up. But how much the consumption needs to go up for that to happen? Well, consumption needs to go up by 500 too. Right? But the question is, what can the government do to stimulate consumption to go up by 500? They can do it two ways. They can change taxes or they can change transfer payments. Transfer payments, they give them people money. So then the question is, how much money do we need to give them? Okay, so we have to give them enough money that they will spend 500. So then 500 is only 90% of what we need to give them. So then you were right, Melody. Is that right? 500 divided by 0.9 is what?
555.
Yeah, 550. So if we give people 550, they're going to spend 500. Consumption will go up. How about if we want to do it by changing taxes? Do we increase or lower taxes?
We lower. Would it be by this?
Okay. We're going to lower taxes. But how much do we need to lower taxes? See, we need to lower taxes enough that people will spend how much? 100. So how much of a reduction in taxes am I supposed to do?
Would it still be the 550?
Yes. Why?
Because they're still going to save part of that money that you're like giving back to them by taking it away from the tax.
You are absolutely correct. So what we need to do is lower taxes by $550. And now people, disposable income increased by $550, but they're only going to consume according to their MPC, which in this case would be 90% of that, which would be 500, and boom, bingo, we close the gap. So then, what is the tools of fiscal policy? Changes in taxes, changes in transfer payments. What is transfer payments?
Government spending.
Yeah, money that we give to people, and changes in government purchases. That's what fiscal policy is. Right?
I have a question about, so we talked about the difference between government spending and transfer payments and how, and taxes, of course, where taxes and transfer payments, because it's giving money directly back to the consumers who are probably saving part of that. It's less efficient than government spending. Does government spending also affect supply in that they're spending money on supply that is probably not going to be consumed because the government is sort of artificially buying that? Is that how that works? So I know like back, I honestly don't know history well enough.
Cliff, Cliff, I'm respecting the way you are thinking. I mean, you are right on track. So this is what it means. This is what I mean. Probably your brain is not there yet. I mean, because in other words, your logic is incredibly good. Your logic is incredibly good. I am surprised that you're already beginning to see this. And I am happy because what it's telling me, this is, man, these guys are grasping the material. And what is happening is this. Government intervention, when the government goes out and spend, let's say, $300 million in the economy, okay, the impact that we think we're going to get, that's 300 times the multiplier, is not really like that. Because when the government intervenes in something, right, it creates a crowding out effect in the economy. It creates a situation in the economy. This is what it creates in the economy. From where does the government spend money from? Where do they get the money from? Does the government go ahead and print the money and say, let me go ahead and spend $300 million? No. The government cannot print money to do government purchases. The government goes out and borrows money. Borrows money from people or borrow money from other governments. Right? And that's why the national debt in the last 10 weeks, it has increased dramatically because we have spent about $3 trillion more than what we had. We borrow that money. So then when the government borrows money, to give money to people, in reality, the impact is not as big as we think, because now by borrowing, it makes interest rates to go up. And then it makes it more difficult for companies, private companies, to borrow money, because individuals are lending the money to the government, buying government bonds instead of buying corporate bonds. So then companies postpone their expansion as a result of government intervention. So then what we are beginning to see is these guys. Look, aggregate supply, aggregate demand, right? The government increases G, right? Government increases G and aggregate demand begins to go up, right? And then through the multiplier effect, boom, we end up someplace right here, right? But that expansion of government purchases came by borrowing. Interest rates go up. So then interest rates go up, then consumption by individuals, they are not going to be able to buy or afford the house they want to buy. And companies' investments are going to decrease. So investments begin to decrease and we end up someplace right here, close to where we wanted. See, this is where we wanted. We wanted to be right here, let's say at 1,000, but we're going to end up someplace right here, let's say at 980. Because the full economic impact cannot be measured. So we have some estimations. So we have some estimation of what we think is going to be, but there's not like a formula that if you do it like this, the change in GDP, the change in GDP is always equal to the initial change times the multiplier, because the initial change is the behavior of individuals, right? But if the government is the one that makes the initial change, then that's still going to have not the full impact, because this become the income of individuals, and then individuals are going to spend according to their MPC, but the MPC can change, right, overnight. Like, for example, I don't know if I can say that. Okay, for example, I have never thought about let me save money. I don't have money. It's like, how can I save if I don't make enough? So I don't have disposable income to be able to save. Remember, we say high levels of income people save more than low levels of income, right? So I have never been like, okay, let me go ahead and save X amount of my income. I put a little bit of a small contribution to my retirement, but I don't have other savings. But now, during this epidemic that is taking place, I discussed with my wife, it's okay, there's uncertainty about the future, right? It's actually my wife that one has been forcing me. So she said, instead of doing this and this and this and that, let's go ahead and start saving. So for the last 10 weeks, my wife said, this is how much I used to spend in gasoline. This is how much I used to spend in going out to eat when I had to go to work. She was working in Chattanooga. You go out and eat and you spend, let's say, $12 a day. 12 times 5 is $60, right, of food every week. $50 in gasoline. That's another, 50 plus 60 is 110, right? So we spend 110 just to go to work. So she says 110 times 4. So I'm actually saving, $440 by not working in Chattanooga. It's something that we were spending. From me to go pick up my kids from school and to go to work to leave, I was putting in my car $50 of gasoline per week. See, my car is there, it's dead. It doesn't even start because I have not started my car, right? So then I have saved $200 up, 50 times 4 is what, 200? Yeah, so I have $200. So we have saved $200 for my part from gasoline. My wife has spent $450, right? So we have saving $650. So my wife saying, instead of blowing this $650, this month, right, let's go ahead and save it. So now we have been doing that for almost 3 months. So she's beginning to say, okay, look at this. Look how much, and now we can either use this money to have a small vacation, or how about if we just learn how to do this? So in other words, that is altering our behavior. And the way it's going to alter our behavior is that, I'm going to take savings as a more serious situation in my life, that we need to do that to have the safety net. See, because the reality of life is, okay, well, if something happened, I know that I have money on my IRS, my retirement. And in case of an emergency, I can just withdraw that money, right? So that's my safety net in my brain. But my wife said, yeah, but what's going to happen if you take your money now, and then 10 years from now, when you're really an old man and you're going to work and there's no money there, right? So it's, again, people change their behavior based on the situations. So then fiscal policy is good, but it's not as good as we think it is, right? So then we cannot have an actual measurement, and that's the things that we actually learning, right? So Cliff, just like you say, it's right. Sometimes things do not happen the way we think they're actually happening, okay? So on this case, we look at the shortfall, and then we just divide that by the multiplier, and we are able to achieve where we want to go. So then fiscal stimulus, we can do it by tax cuts or government purchases, okay? So again, the fiscal stimulus needs to close the gap. But the gap must be larger, but the actual stimulus have to be bigger than the gap, and that's what I was telling you. So we measure the shortfall to be able to close the gap. What is a shortfall? Is the amount of additional aggregate demand needed to achieve full employment after allowing for price level changes. In other words, we are right here, we are point A. We want to close this gap. We want to close this gap from 5.6 to 6, but to be able to close this gap, we need to move the aggregate demand all the way to the right, that it will intersect right here. And to be able to move all the way to the right, we need to move it this way to point E, which that's the shortfall. So what we're trying to close is the shortfall to be able to achieve the closing of the gaps. Okay, so I don't know if I can put it in another way. It will be, for example, think about a, let me see, think about a door, The wind is blowing and the door is open. Now, if you apply just enough pressure to close the door, see, the pressure that you put on the door has to be bigger than the pressure coming. Because you apply the same pressure, the door is just going to stay there. Does it make sense? So you just have to be a little bit more. You just have to be a little bit more pressure, pushing, right, to be able to keep the door closed. So in other words, the gap is the closing of the door. So then to be able to close the door, we have to put more pressure than the pressure that is coming. And that's all it means. So then we look at a shortfall to be able to close that gap, okay? So then increased government spending is a form of fiscal stimulus. So then we already discussed this. The horizontal shift in the aggregate demand can be right here. The horizontal shift right here. The horizontal shift in the aggregate demand is equal to fiscal stimulus plus the induced increase in consumption, what happened after the government spent it. So that will be the horizontal shift is equal to the multiplier times the fiscal stimulus. Okay, because of the multiplier effect. See, the government spends, and that creates another round of consumption as a result of the new money that came into the economy. So if we don't spend enough, the economy is going to stay in a recession. But if we spend too much, that can create an inflationary period. So then what do we need to do? Well, measure the shortfall and divide it by the multiplier. That's it. Measure the shortfall and divide it by the multiplier. We can also do it by cutting taxes. But we already told you that when we cut in taxes, the change had to be bigger because people only behave according to their MPC. So actually, we can do it by using a tax multiplier. Okay, so let me stop right here and let me give you a 10-minute break. Okay, let's take a 10-minute break and then we'll come back. Let me put this in pause and bingo. Okay. So when we're reducing taxes, think about this, when we are reducing taxes, we are not adding more dollars to the economy. We're not adding more dollars. We're not pumping money to the economy. What we are doing is allowing the earners to keep more money or their income. So then once we increase the disposable income, then we know that these individuals are going to consume this extra money, and how much additional consumers are going to spend depends on the size of their MPC. So if your after taxes money increase because there's a reduction in taxes, and let's say your income increased by $100, then you're going to increase your consumption according to your marginal propensity to consume. Right? If your MPC is 0.9, you're going to consume 90% of that. So then, since there's no unusual, in other words, when we reduce taxes, there's no new input or spending, so that a tax cost contain less fiscal stimulus than a government spending, which simply means a government spending tends to be bigger than a reduction in taxes. Because if we increase government purchases by 200, then that's an initial spending, 200 times the multiplier. But if we reduce taxes by 200, that's not the initial change, because the initial change is going to be 200 times the multiplier. No, I'm sorry, 200 times the MPC. In other words, whatever the MPC is, it will be the percentage. So then the initial spending injection can be less than the size of a tax cut, okay? So then what's the problem with doing this? Well, every time we do a spending, right, or increasing government purchases, right, we have to do some things. We either have to say, okay, how are we going to pay for this? So when the government spends money or when the government reduces taxes, what we're actually doing, we're actually increasing a budget deficit. Because we are borrowing money. And that's exactly what is happening today. We increase government purchases, we increase transfer payments by $3 trillion. Well, guess what's happening to our budget deficit? Our budget deficit this year is going to increase by $3 trillion. So an increase in government purchases and a decrease in taxes at the same size, right? What will happen then? Well, in that case, it will balance. In other words, if we increase government purchases by 50 and we decrease taxes by 50, right? The things will balance in the economy. So we're just simply trying to tell you, that in many cases we need to intervene in the economy to try to achieve certain objectives, and we can do it different ways. Now, how about if we want to have a fiscal restraint? In other words, the economy is moving in an opposite direction. Look, let's assume that the economy is now at E2, that's full employment. And now we begin to experience some type of economic boom, and people are working like crazy, and aggregate demand increase, and now we move from AD-2 to AD-1. So as you can see, at this new equilibrium, look at prices. Prices are too high. We have inflation. So then what can we do to move the aggregate demand to the left? Well, we look at the shortfall, and at this new price, the shortfall is this. This is the excess. This is the excess that we have to get rid of it, right? So how can we move the aggregate demand to the left? Through fiscal policy. Decrease government purchases, right? Increase taxes, or decrease transfer payments. See, all you have to know is that the multiplier works in both directions. It multiplies. It multiplies what we do, or it multiplies what we were not, or what we decide not to do, right? So again, fiscal restraint, we increase taxes, we reduce government expenditures, and we shift the aggregate demand to the left, okay? Again, so the question is, let me come back to this. We discussed this. So then when we increase taxes, the direct effect of a tax hike is a reduction in disposable income. And if we reduce disposable income, then that's going to reduce consumption, right? And it's also going to decrease savings. So as you can see, then a tax hikes have a negative multiplier effect, which simply means it moves the aggregate demand to the left, okay? If we reduce transfer payments, the same situation. People have less money, less disposable income, they spend less, and they save less. So then transfer payments and taxes have the same effect. Now, so then the question is, so what are we supposed to do? Should we supposed to reduce taxes? Well, increase taxes? Well, increasing taxes is, as you already know, is politically speaking, is very unpopular. Right? So the problem in the United States is that we make decisions not because they make economic sense, we make decisions because they make political sense. However, the goal is supposed to be to eliminate, the gaps. That's what we're trying to do, to eliminate the gaps. So let's come back to the question. So what is the impact in the private sector when the government spends money? And that was the statement that was being made by Cliff, Now, what is the impact? Well, when the government spends money, it creates a crowding out effect. Simply means it's a reduction in private sector borrowing and spending because the government is actually borrowing money. So that's what we call the crowding out. So instead of going to where we wanted to go, we're a little bit short than that. See, a fiscal stimulus will most likely be financed by government borrowing. That's what we're doing today. So if the government continues borrowing, there will be less credit available for the private sector, which we're going to reduce less borrowing and the spending. So then the private sector spending reduction offsets the government spending, reducing the impact. That's all you have to know. In other words, the impact of government intervention by borrowing money is not a full impact, because that intervention actually forces consumers and companies to decrease their consumption and their investments in the economy. Now, what is the problem with fiscal policy? Well, the problem with fiscal policy is that in many cases, we don't respond at the right time, either because we don't recognize the situation. Another thing is that in many cases, to be able to respond through fiscal policy is not something that can be done overnight. Think about, for example, what we're trying to do. We're trying to stimulate the economy, and the bill has already been in the House of the Senate for 1 week. Now think about it, this is an emergency situation. So we have been discussing this for about a month, and we have not done it because we're trying to develop a policy. Then we have to pass the legislation, and then we have to implement the policy. There are some people today that have not even received the first check of the first stimulus. They're still waiting. So then as a result of this, then many people say that the best thing to do in many cases is just for the government to make the actual purchase instead of giving people money. Because the actual impact of whatever we are doing, it can take months. All these studies that have been done, they say that every time the government intervenes in the economy, either by reducing taxes or by increasing government purchase, the full impact of that intervention, you cannot feel it until 24 months later. Okay, so then whatever we're doing today, what we did last month, the full impact of that is not going to be felt until 2 years from now. So that's why Congress say, okay, should we wait? We already spent $3 trillion. We know we pump $3 trillion in the economy. Literally pump, we put money. The money is not in circulation yet. We give it to the people, households, and the money stuck right there in the households because people don't want to spend. But we know the money is there. So eventually that money is going to be used. So then we're afraid that if we put another $3 trillion, then we're going to have $6 trillion in the economy. You know, it's like 33% of the economic activity is now in the hands of the households. What are they going to do? So some of them are going to begin to spend a little bit after they feel more confident. I mean, think about, for example, what is happening with the stock market. The stock market is beginning to go a little bit higher. Companies are beginning to open their doors. Disney is opening. Now, those people that have been saving their money, they say that stimulus paycheck, and now their neighbors went to Disney, let's say next month, and they come back and everything is good. Then they say, oh, before the summer is over, let me go to Disney too. And then they're going to begin to what? They begin to spend it. And once people begin to feel like, okay, you know, my neighbor is outside and he had not died, I think I can probably go outside myself. So people begin to test the waters, and if the vaccine comes, you know, then eventually all that money is going to spend like, let's go wild, baby. Let's go get drunk. Let's go invite my neighbors and have a wine party. That's what people are going to do because now they have the money and they feel happy and they are not afraid of dying, and they're going to buy neighbors and they're going to have barbecues and cookouts and all that stuff. But think about this. How many cookouts took place this Memorial Day? With the exceptions of the crazy people in Florida, not a lot of people went to the beaches. Any of you went to the beach? Yeah, except with the exception of the crazy people in Florida. I mean, all those people. But the rest of the nation is still hunkered down. They're still like, let's wait. All right, so that's the end of the chapter, guys. That's the end of the chapter. So the question is, does fiscal policy works? Yes. Is it accurate? No. Right? Do we have a better choices, better options? No. Do we need to use it? Yes. And that's why all the nations of the world are doing that. All the nations of the world, they're actually stimulating the economy by intervening in the economy. Some of them are doing it bigger than others. I mean, poor countries don't have the money to give people cash. You know, but they're trying to do something. And the reason is because what is economics? It's the study of the actions, the human behavior of individuals, what they do, right? And if individuals all become afraid, then there's fear in our nation, and the nation becomes stagnated, and then the potential output that can be produced is not produced. Think about the potential output that can be produced by 40 million people, larger than the population of the country of Argentina. larger than the population of the country of Canada. I think Canada has about 35 million people. Think about the potential output that is not being produced. How many cars, how many houses, how many outfits, how many doors, how many books can be printed? And it's not being printed because of the fear. So this is the end of the chapter. Tomorrow we're going to continue with fiscal policy. We're going to work some couple of problems, and then I think we begin monetary policy on Monday. Okay. So guys, have a wonderful day. I'll see you tomorrow. Any questions? Perfect. Love you guys. Enjoy your afternoon. Cliff, you can go back to bed now. And Tina, you can do the same thing.